Hey, how's it going, everybody? So, I wanted to do a video real quick about Linus Tech Tips and their experience with Linux. Now, this is something that I say all the time. Um, a lot of the people are hyper focused on their own specific areas. There's the hardcore, what I like to call the more hardcore people who have time to kill and they really love configuring things about Linux, like their bash shell or even their window manager. They love to just configure everything. And I think that's awesome. And I love looking at all the stuff that they create. Often I'm over on, Unix porn, looking at all the different desktops that people like to design and how they do it. And I mean, it could be anything from KDE, Xmonad, i3. I mean, all sorts of different window managers, tiling window managers, all sorts of stuff. And I think it's awesome. I don't have time for that kind of thing, but I love looking at this stuff. And if I had time to kill, that would be a cool project I'd want to look at. And then you have the more maybe corporate people who are only using Linux because their company has some kind of license with Red Hat or other enterprise level you know Linux desktops. So then there's like the casual people who just want to play games. And I probably fall into the category of like a software developer, but I'm not developing any software right now for Linux specifically. I do have an open source project, but I barely work on it every once in a while. Um, I haven't really talked about it on the channel yet, but yeah, I would just consider myself a user of Linux for the most part. Now, the things with Linux is what I was trying to say is everybody's hyper focused on some new technology or something coming out. For example, Ubuntu, they just redid their installer with Flutter. Um, GNOME keeps on changing things, like, for example, the switch from 39 to 40 for GNOME, or 3.9 to 40, or however they're saying it. They changed the way that the desktop layout is. So instead of it being up and down for the workspace switcher, the desktops, the different desktops you can have, they made it left to right. Now, this change is not really that big of a deal. It's not going to harm anybody. It's not going to, be the end of the world. But it just shows a kind of lack of understanding of what normal people want and what normal people need. Um, and when I say it normal kind of loosely, but if we just use an example of any good design, you kind of have to make decisions and stick with them long term. And when you make a big change, that's fine, but it has to be kind of like one and done, gradual. Everybody hated when Windows went from 7 to 8. The UI was incomplete. There was some things in one way, some things not in the other way. Um, the full screen was jarring and it didn't really work that well. Um, People have gotten used to that kind of idea, I think. But that just goes in the same direction that you can't constantly change things. They like GNOME 3 going to GNOME 4 is less of a change from GNOME 2 to GNOME 3. That's great, and I understand why they switched from GNOME 3, making things more responsive, making it so that things can get smaller and larger and all those kind of things. I don't want to get too into the weeds on GNOME specific things because it's only one piece of the desktop environment, but it's just like an example of the mindset that constant change is okay. Where I kind of think that, I like to have my applications, user space applications, constantly updated. And that's why I think app images, Flatpaks, and even snaps are a good idea for that purpose. Now, for my desktop environment, I don't want it to change that often. I want it to be solid and stable, and I want my plugins to work. I don't want the APIs that those plugins are using. I mean, GNOME did a great job making these plugins use JavaScript, which is a really simple and easy to understand language to develop extensions, which makes your desktop environment extensible really easily. So, I mean, we have awesome extensions to choose from, which is fantastic, but they haven't actually been stable enough for a lot of extension developers to want to stick with it. I mean, there's been a lot of people working on stuff. Somebody will, stop working on something and somebody else will pick it up, luckily, for a lot of the really popular extensions. But something that was built by one guy in his free time because he had an interest in a specific problem gets built, he shouldn't have to, redo it every month because GNOME decides they want to make one single alteration that completely breaks his extension. Some of the extension kind of criteria, like the version that is required or supported by the extension is usually within the extension code. Some of that stuff should be, available to end users to verify that those things actually are compatible and there's no regressions or problems. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that still has to be worked on, but it's just the mentality. Why is Ubuntu remaking their installer? They just remade their installer a little while ago. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. And they keep redoing things over and over and over again when simple things just aren't fixed. They're just not working. The Software Center, which is Software Center, Software Store, whatever the heck you want to call it, okay? Everybody knows of these things from Windows and Mac OS world that they're stores. It doesn't matter that they're free stores for most distros, except I think there's Elementary. I think they actually have purchases still. I could be wrong about that, but this is where everybody's going to get their stuff. And if it doesn't work here, it's just terrible. I mean, if things don't work and people are reporting that things don't work, it should come off of the store after a certain amount of time. If people are reporting this snap is busted, it should be removed after like 20 people report that this is busted. It should be removed. If Ubuntu Canonical is getting bug reports that people are submitting after these applications crashed, it should be removed. A lot of the times these automated things that would make it seem more polished are things that can be done through programming. It's not something that would require a huge amount of programming work to get those things implemented either. You could even create, community editors similar to like Wikipedia, where you get a certain, reputation based on your contributions, and those editors can slowly make things better. So a lot of the times on the Flatpak stuff, I mean, I'm not super involved with all these things. I just know that these things could be better. That's all I have to say. So their experience, I mean, Linus was talking about his experience. It looks like Luke had a little bit of an easier time because he went maybe the safer route with a little bit older stack. I think Linux Mint usually lags behind a little bit on stuff, but stuff usually works pretty well. Personally, I just stick to vanilla Ubuntu because that's what I know the best. That's not to say that anything else isn't good as well. KDE Neon's pretty good. I've used Arch before, and I've had good experience with just vanilla Arch as well. So I think you got to stick with what works. You got to stick with what you know, especially when you're just trying to do stuff on your operating system. You're not trying to fix your operating system or configure it or anything like that. You just want to use it as a tool. So I think what Linus experienced was he was listening to the community. He tried Manjaro, he tried Pop! OS, and I had the same experience with Pop! OS. I mean, Pop! OS, I like the changes that they're making. I like the direction. But in order to do some of the changes, like as an example, system deboot rather than grub, if you're going to do that, you need to provide a tool and a way to repair grub. Okay, so if you're going to change the way that everybody in the Ubuntu land is doing it, you need to provide a way so that we can have an automatic way to repair. So if you're not providing an automatic way to repair, then a lot of people are going to have problems. They're not going to be able to solve those problems because they're not technical. They don't want to be technical. They just want to use the operating system, and that's okay. That's okay to be that. It's okay to do that. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of people look down on people like that, and I think that's kind of silly. This isn't about spoon feeding answers for test questions or something. This is people just want to use Linux because it's private. It does a good job at what it is designed for, and applications that are designed to run on it work really well. We should, have it be usable by just general populace, and to have it be usable by general populace, you have to take these things into consideration. So if you're going to make a switch, so like normally if you're on Ubuntu, they're still using Grub. There's a program you can get from a PPA, and it's a boot repair software. I've used it a couple of times. Now you can go in and manually fix some of the boot records. You can manually edit that stuff in the UEFI for your BIOS, and I've made Ask Ubuntu posts about that and telling people how to fix their keys for UEFI stuff and all that. So that's fine, but I'm just saying System 76 is really overlooking, if they're trying to make their operating system something that you can use not on just System 76 hardware, where people are going to be using it with mixed environments, trying to dual boot and do all these other things because they're uncomfortable just using straight Linux. They don't have an extra disk laying around. They need to make sure that every part of the process is solved for somebody who's not technical. Somebody who's not technical needs to know, how do I fix this? How do I repair this? And they need to have software in place to do that. All right, sorry about that. My kid walked in. But basically what I was saying is there's just a lot of stuff that if you're going to do something, you need to make it complete. It needs to be feature complete, or you need to not include it. There's been little bugs, little problems that exist in all sorts of stuff. Now, for example, the software updater or the software sources app in Ubuntu. When you add a PPA, right, and that can be done in various ways. That can even be done with a GUI potentially. If you add a PPA, and that PPA or software source, for example, and lots of different DEBs add software sources, and when you upgrade, you want to re-add those software sources. There's lots of situations where a user is expected to know how to use the command line, or they need to know what the error means and different things like that, where they could have it be where some of those errors are fixed automatically for the user, or you give the user options. So in the software sources application, just as an example, if one of the software sources is invalid and you get an error, why does it just show an error? Why, even on apt, it just shows an error. Why doesn't it ask the user, hey, you have an error. Would you like to disable this software source, this PPA? Why doesn't it ask that? That's a super common thing, and it can easily be programmed into both pieces of software. Into apt, it's probably less important because usually that's a more technical person. They're probably going to know, but still, you could still do it. And it would still be nice. It would still save time from having to go in and edit a source text file or use the software sources program. It would save you time either way. So that's just little things about Polish that just don't make sense. Even in GNOME, for example, I just recently upgraded Ubuntu. Now, this could be Ubuntu's problem, it could be GNOME's problem. Either way, one of my extensions is a very popular extension. I love to use it, called Dash to Panel. It just adds a simple panel to the bottom of your desktop, removes the top bar. So normally I don't have my desktop like this. I like to use Dash to Panel just because it's what I prefer. Everybody has their preference. That's what I prefer. So I tried to update it, and it installed it, but then there's an error. So even with GNOME's extensions, it doesn't gracefully handle the situation. I was successfully using the previous version of the extension. It was working fine. There was an update. I clicked the update icon. That's a little green arrow pointing up, and it now has an error and it doesn't work anymore. And I use Ubuntu on several computers, and I use that same extension, and they all have the same problem. So now, I'm not sure what happened. This could be because GNOME decided to change things. This could be because some Ubuntu specific conflict. I'm guessing it's a GNOME specific issue because they're not gracefully handling these things. It's just, this is the mentality of the Linux folks a lot of the times. They don't complete what they've built. It's half complete. Just displaying error is a silly idea. You should not do it like that. If a user is displayed an error, they need to be given action options. So if there's an error, they need to be given options. So in the case of this extension, they need to be given the option of the ability to roll back the extension to a previously working state, if it was working previously, or to completely remove it, or to submit a bug report, or to open a channel of communication, or to add a review, or so many things to increase the lines of communication with the software developers and the people using the software to make that process clean, right? So this is something that a lot of people maybe don't have experience with. I'm a software developer. I maintain software, so I know what it's like to try to fix things and try to have people understand the whole process. So this is a sad state of Linux right now, is that we're in a perpetual change cycle. Like, the developers are obsessed with constantly changing everything, which I understand, like, from a young programmer's perspective. I have the energy and the zeal to think that I can just change everything and it'll go smoothly. And most likely, I probably did have a lot of energy to do some of the stuff very quickly. And sometimes there'd be a few bugs along the way, but it would get done eventually. So I don't want to discourage people from, making changes, making updates, making things happen. That's awesome. But we need to have some of the older folks, the older programmers, or just people who are a little bit more cautious with some of these ideas and say, hey, before we start doing a bunch of changes, we need to go back here and fix this, this, and this. And maybe a lot of these projects just don't have the senior developers or a person saying that, because everything is contributed kind of sporadically sometimes based on an open source contributor's whims. They want to have something and they don't really care about this other thing because they know what they're doing. And a lot of the developers, they probably think that way because, like, oh, I don't care about this error message. But Canonical, System 76, Red Hat, a lot of these companies, they should be having these things. They should be definitely doing it. And where Linus got tripped up was a problem that was from the command line, and he had a good warning. That's fine. I think he had a great warning for that problem. But why didn't it work in the software store? That's what we should be focusing on. Why was that broken? Why didn't that work? Why did it just do nothing? Why are applications installed and then you get no notification? Why is there no notification in the App Center? Why is there no notifications in the notification bar? Sometimes it says the wrong thing. Why is it saying the wrong thing? It should never say the wrong thing. These are things that just should not be broken. We've been installing things through the repository for a very long time as Linux users, where Windows and Mac have only been doing it for a little while. And I'm sure the business minded people in those areas, they would think that's broken if it's doing something like that. So this just kind of like a moment of reflection for Linux users, I think. Yeah, we're doing a lot of things great. Yeah, Linux is awesome. it's all good, rah rah rah. But yeah, this is a prime example of, Linux users just kind of having blinders on. At least Linux devs, sometimes having blinders to specific areas, or even, business managers. Canonical is probably not really super focused on the desktop. They want to make snaps a thing. They want to make their server space a thing. I don't know. I don't know what their major focus is. So that's just what it seems like to me. But this is a good test case, and I'm glad that Linus did this. I'm glad Luke did this. This is going to be something we can digest and talk about, and hopefully fix. Hopefully have higher standards for when we're pushing things out. All right, so that's all I have. A little bit longer than I expected, but hope you guys enjoyed that little rant. I'll talk to you guys later.